FPL Game Week 26 team selection, 3 green arrows in a row for me, 2 free transfers and the assistant manager chip active. How am I planning on making it 4 green arrows in a row whilst also running through all of the other key information going into Game Week 26? Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricing, and in today's video I'll be running through my team selection ahead of Game Week 26 and also hopefully all of the key information to help you get set up along the way, including a fairly extensive section on the assistant manager because mine's still active and it's a pretty split pin this week as well, so lots to go through there. In the meantime, let's take a quick look and a summary of my Game Week 25 team performance. 94 points, and it was enough for another green arrow. Although, again, fairly slight. There will be some much bigger scores than mine hanging around in the comments. So do put yours down below, especially if you've beaten me, and especially if you hit 100 points as well. Let me know what you got in the comments below. The assistant manager came in clutch for me for the second week in a row. 14 points from Emery, not quite as good as Moyes, but another 2-2 draw against Liverpool. That's back-to-back for the assistant manager chip for me. I have gotten table bonus from both of the game weeks. Obviously, Moyes was a little bit better, but I'll take it from Emery as well. 7 points on average for each game. And 36, I think it is, overall between Moyes and Emery after 2 game weeks worth of assistant manager. When I first played that, I would have absolutely taken that. So very happy with that. 1 more week to go. No double game week to kind of get me out of jail free there. I've got to pick one of them. So it's going to be a fairly tight call, and we'll go through that a little bit later. Across my 11, there wasn't a lot to shout about. Trent was probably the standout performer. Got a clean sheet in the first game before getting taken off and the clean sheet wipeout. And then the second game got the goal shortly before being taken off as well. So a bit of positive variance for me there. Outside of that, most of the players didn't really cover themselves in glory. Gabriel got a clean sheet, Pickford got a save point, and Semenyo got an assist, but really not too much to shout about. I do feel like I'm on the wrong Bournemouth midfielder at the moment, more on that later, and the other two, Cliver and Dango, both outscored him, and even Christie did as well this week, and Tavernier as well, so all of those outscoring him was a little bit frustrating, but still, at least it's a return, I guess. Salah was obviously my top scorer in the 11, but only captained him, and the effective ownership was higher than 200%, so he actually did me a little bit of damage. And Morgan Rogers, who was a bit of a last-minute move, I fell victim to the pressure, or the temptation, I suppose you call it, of the double game week, and I do regret that a little bit now. I'd regret it less if he'd buried one of the chances in the first game, and he was obviously very close to returning, but he didn't. And 4 points from him across the 2 games in the game week wasn't really enough to make that transfer worthwhile. I'm 1 transfer down. I'll need another transfer to get rid of him, and that will likely mean a hit between now and game week 29. I was hoping that hit would pay off in game week 25, and in a way, because it was Ahmad I was selling, it kind of has, because Ahmad would have got a 0-pointer, obviously gotten subbed off for Hall because he was injured. Hall got a 0-pointer as well. So in a way, I am actually 4 points up, and it probably cancels out the hit, but it doesn't really feel good. It doesn't feel like I've won in that scenario, so I'm not going to claim victory there. Gakpo was obviously the main frustration. Injured across both of the games. It looked like he was a doubt for Wolves, but I really thought he'd play at least a few minutes against Wolves and then probably start against Villa. But that injury looked a little bit more serious than maybe Slot was letting on to begin with, or at least he didn't really have the information after the first press conference. It looks like he's still a doubt going into City, although he's not far off, but I do think he's one of the players, especially considering that I'm not looking at free hitting in game week 29, that I'm likely to move on this week or over the next few weeks. Overall, I think there's 2 or 3 transfers I need to make this week, or at least want to, including the assistant manager, and I've only got 2 free transfers to use without taking a hit. So a hit looks likely. Let's start looking at some of the moves I might be making, starting off with the assistant manager chip. So I've used this graphic once already this game week in my transfer options video. So if you want another extensive deep dive, do go back and look at that one. But this is a fantastic graphic from Rob T FPL. Do go check him out on socials if you get the chance. Loads of great work there. But it goes through the expected points for all 20 assistant managers going into game week 26. Now, obviously no double game week to fall back on this week, so the points on average are a little bit lower than the likes of Slot, Emery, Moyes over the last 2, but still plenty of opportunities there, and Arteta comes out top of the bunch. Now, obviously, he comes at a bit more of a premium price, 1.5 million, but I can get there with one or two other transfers tactically used in other ways, and he is by far the most likely to secure a win going into Game Week 26. 8.4 expected points, a 77% chance of a win against West Ham with the bookies odds, and an over 90% chance of getting a result of some kind. So the security blanket of going with Arteta is definitely weighing on my mind, especially considering I've gotten 2 good results out of the assistant manager, and if I just wanted to secure it, net myself about 40 to 45 points overall across the 3 game weeks, which would be a pretty great return. I'm happy with that. Then Arteta is probably the safest way to go. Although with any of these managers, there's never a guarantee of any points. He's got the highest opportunity, the best chance of a clean sheet by a long way, the highest projected goals, I believe, across all 20, and the highest chance of a win as well. However, it is a bit boring going there, and the upside is much lower. You're probably looking at a 12, maybe 13 pointer at an absolute push, and you could also end up with a 0 pointer if you're incredibly unlucky anyway. So the next 3 managers on the table under that are 2 of the promoted sides, Leicester and Ipswich, both at home against Brentford and Tottenham, respectively. But I don't honestly really fancy them. I talked about them a little bit in my previous video. I think if I had to pick one of those 2, it would probably be McKenna, because Spurs are a little bit up and down at the moment, but they've got players coming back from injury at the moment. They've had a full week of rest, and I do expect at least Spurs to get something from that game. I wouldn't be massively shocked if Ipswich pulled something off, but I'm not absolutely convinced by it, so it's not a manager that I'm highly considering right now. You might disagree with me, that's absolutely fine. Van Nistelrooy, I've really just not got a good gut feeling on. Even though he's expected 8 points, I think Brentford are going to turn them over. Leicester haven't been in great nick at the moment. And again, although the opportunity's there, I think there's slightly better upside, potentially anyway. Obviously, it can go either way in going with Glasner. 8 points expected for him, but that table bonus fixture against Fulham is now locked in thanks to last night's results. And although Fulham have been in great form recently, especially at Craven Cottage as well, I don't think anyone would be massively surprised if come Saturday evening or Sunday, whenever the game is, I actually can't remember on the spot, but whenever you look at the results, scanning through, no one would be surprised if Crystal Palace were to get a result against Fulham. And although Fulham have been in good form recently, form comes and goes very quickly, and it's hard to predict when it will come and go. And with the players that Palace have got, the likes of Mateta, Munoz, Eze as well, if he's back fit, they can definitely do damage. They've got an over 50% chance of getting some kind of result against Fulham with the bookies, so 26% on the win. 28% is that security blanket for the draw as well, which would be a roundabout level with a win for some of the non-table bonus managers. So if Arteta got a win against West Ham, it's somewhere between 9 to 12 points. If Glasner got a draw, it's 8 or 9 points. So I don't mind it as a backup option for the draw against Fulham, but obviously you're swinging for that win against Fulham, and a 26% chance isn't terrible, although it's about even with the likes of the 2 promoted clubs, Leicester and Ipswich. I've got a bit of a better gut feeling about Glasner though, so it's one of the 2 for me. It's either go safe with Arteta and maybe make one compromise to my other transfers, which I'll discuss in a second, but obviously lower upside, or go with Glasner, take the chance that it could end in flames and I might get a 0 pointer from it. Obviously about a 44%, 46% chance of getting nothing from it via the bookies odds, or maybe 1 point from a goal. But obviously a much higher upside, looking at an 18-point minimum if they were to pull off a win at Craven Cottage, which again, I wouldn't be massively shocked if they were to do so. He also comes cheaper, so I wouldn't need to compromise on one of my other transfers. So for me, it's either A or B, Arteta or Glasner, and it will go down to the wire, and it largely depends how happy I am with the compromise I'd be making if I were to go with Arteta to my other transfer. A quick look at the captaincy matrix going into Game Week 26. A split pin this week because there's a lot of different good options with Man City away for Salah. But I have to admit, the captaincy armband will be going nowhere. I will not be moving it off of Salah given the form he's in. He's just absolutely inevitable at the moment. A goal and an assist against Villa. I think it's 6 or 7 game weeks in a row now in which he's returned. And 39 returns in 25 game weeks this season, 26 matches, but 39 returns is about 1.5 returns a match. Against City, who we've just seen in the Champions League, obviously against an elite side, Real Madrid, but they are still susceptible at the back to those fast counter-attacks. Gvardiol will bomb forward and there will be spaces in behind. They don't have the control they used to have over games. They don't have that stranglehold. And Mo Salah, even when City were at the height of their powers, still found a way to score fairly regularly against them and get good results against them. So I still think it's Salah for me. And that data is just irresistible as well. If you did want to go against Salah at any point this season, this is probably one of the best weeks to do so, though. You've got Isak at home to Forest, which I've seen a lot of people touting. I'm not massively keen on myself. Forest's defence is pretty solid. Newcastle haven't looked great in the last couple of game weeks either. Although Isak is irresistible, he's been in fantastic form, 17 goals from him. I just don't have a great gut feeling about that one. The data's good. The fixture's average, I suppose. But if you're looking at backing a player with the data, you might as well be going for Salah, in my personal opinion. One player that I think is being overlooked a little bit is Cole Palmer. Now, again, recently not been in great form, but Villa will be playing their third game in the space of a week after a pretty tough encounter against Liverpool. Will they be a bit leggy? They've got a pretty rotated backline as well at the moment, so I do see a universe in which Cole Palmer feasts. Now, without Jackson, Chelsea don't look anywhere near as potent right now, and they are figuring things out, so it would be a bit of a bold call to suggest that he hauls in this one. But I personally wouldn't be surprised if he gets a goal or two, or maybe a goal assist against Aston Villa. Villa, I believe anyway, will be a bit leggy. We've seen it after their Champions League midweek fixtures that they've not had great results or looked a little bit leggy after those midweek games. And this is effectively the same thing. They've had a midweek game against Liverpool and now they'll be going up against Chelsea, which is another tough fixture. Chelsea obviously fighting for Champions League. I do see a universe in which Cole Palmer does pretty well. But again, I prefer Mo Salah personally. After that, there are some other good options. You've got the Brentford boys away at Leicester. I personally think that it's a pretty tight call between Wissa and Mbeumo. Wissa's got the data on Mbeumo at the moment. Even though he hasn't been returning recently, the underlying data really supports the hypothesis that he's still a great pick. So I wouldn't be completely ruling out the likes of Wissa or Mbeumo, but particularly Wissa I quite like this week. Outside of that, you could back one of the Bournemouth midfielders as well with a good home fixture against Wolves. But for me, personally, it's sticking on Salah. He's just too consistent, and I do back him to do really well against Man City. So on to my two main transfer options going into Game Week 26. There are three assets, I won't call them players because we've got a manager there as well, that I'm looking to potentially shift on. Morgan Rogers is on there, but that would be for the -4. Now, I'll quickly discuss why I'm open to a -4 this week. The reason would be because no matter how I play it, I'm going to have to take a -4 between now and Game Week 29 to get out a full playing 11 that I'm happy with come the blank game week in 29. Rodgers doesn't have a fixture that week and doesn't have the best fixtures between now and then either. Although I wouldn't be massively surprised if he returned well against Chelsea. A lot of Chelsea fans are suggesting that it would be mad to get rid of Rodgers ahead of that fixture, considering how open they've been recently. But I think when you look at the alternatives, and not just this game week, over the longer stretch, it makes sense to move him on for maybe one of the Bournemouth midfielders. Now, it won't be for everyone. Some people will stay firm on Rodgers, especially if you are free hitting in Game Week 29. And the next three fixtures aren't terrible, so he's not a must-sell. But for me, because I'm almost locked into taking a -4 at some point, just because of my team makeup right now, I might as well be using that -4 now and giving myself the most chance of it paying off across several game weeks rather than just using it in Game Week 29 itself. And then the player that I bring in has to almost return and pay off that -4 straight away for it to work out for me. Whereas if I did it now for one of the Bournemouth midfielders who have great fixtures between now and Game Week 29, better than Aston Villa's, and better data as well in both cases, I think there's a better chance of me paying off that -4, if not this week, over the next few game weeks. But I do still back them to do well this week. So we'll go through the alternatives to Rodgers in a second, but let's start off with the assistant manager. as I mentioned, there are two routes that I could take. I could either upgrade Emery to someone like an Arteta. Arteta at 1.5 million, obviously I need that 0.7. I've got nothing in the bank right now. But with some of the transfers I'm making, I could make that money available. So if I was to go with the safe option with Arteta, then I would probably look at downgrading Gakpo to Cunha. Now, Cunha's data is pretty decent. He's returned twice in the last 2 game weeks, and I discussed him at length in my transfer options video. So again, do go check that out. But I'm really bullish on him over the next few game weeks. I'd be bringing him in a little bit early because Bournemouth followed by Fulham are not 2 easy fixtures. But if Wolves get anything from those games or get even a goal from either of those games, it's very likely to come from Cunha. And he's so good on the bonus point system that 1 goal or 1 assist even could be as much as a 7, 8, 9 pointer for him. So I'm pretty bullish on bringing him in, especially because it enables me to make moves elsewhere. And Gakpo, of course, is a doubt going into Man City away. So I think Cunha's coming in no matter what I do. In option 1 and 2, he's the one consistent transfer that I'd probably be making. I'm pretty locked in on that. But then it's a matter of which Bournemouth midfielder do I want to be bringing in for Rodgers. Now, with option 1, because I'm upgrading Emery to Arteta, I need that 0.7, so that's fine. I can get that from moving Gakpo down to Cunha. But if I did want to move Rodgers on, I wouldn't have the spare money to upgrade him to Kluivert, who comes in at 6 million. Dango Altara is obviously 5.1, so I can downgrade Rodgers to Altara in one move. So with option 1, because I'd have nothing in the bank after those first 2 moves, it would have to be Altara. 0.61 XGI per 90, very, very decent. And of course, he's playing out of position as a centre forward for Bournemouth. Now, the only hesitation I've got there is whether or not he's going to be a minutes risk by the time I get to game week 29 and 30, because I will need to rely on him for those 2 game weeks. Bournemouth have great fixtures in those 2 game weeks, and I'm not going to want to use another transfer to get rid of a player that is no longer starting by the time we get there. So I need to be sure that Altara's minutes are safe by the time we get to game week 29-30. So I'm looking closely to see whether Evan Nilsson's expected to be back around then. It looks likely that Evan Nilsson might be back around about game week 30-31, so it's a bit tight. But I still think that given the way that Altara is performing at the moment, he should be fairly secure in that starting 11 until he does something wrong. And they'll probably bring Evan Nilsson back in fairly slowly because it was a long-term injury. He's not just going to come straight back into the starting 11. So he might get a few minutes off the bench in game week 29 or 30 if he's back by then. But I still don't really see it as a massive risk. So Altara is really tempting me, especially because I'm wildcarding after game week 30 when he might become a bit more of a doubt. But if I was to not upgrade Emery, it does open up the route to Kluivert. Now, I think I marginally prefer Kluivert over Altara because of the penalties. The data is very even, 0.60 XGI per 90, so not really anything splitting them there. But the additional penalties do help. And the fact that even if Evan Nilsson were to make a miraculous recovery and come back in sooner, Kluivert isn't going to be the risk here. He will continue to start games. He's in great form at the moment. And although he might get taken off a little bit earlier every now and then, around 70 to 80 minutes, I still think that's plenty of time. And I'm still secure enough in the knowledge that he'll continue to start games up until the point I wildcard. But all of that would mean that I'm not upgrading Emery. I'd have to maybe do a more sideways move to someone like a Glasner. And Glasner at 0.8 million doesn't cost me any extra, so I can easily make that move. I wouldn't be priced out if there is 1 or 2 price changes with Cunha or Kluivert in the next couple of days. But it all comes down to whether or not I want to back the higher variance but higher upside manager in Glasner. Obviously, a much higher chance of me crashing and getting 0 points from him, or play it a little bit more safe with Arteta and take more of a comfort blanket in the percentage chance of a win, but obviously, again, much lower upside. So it's whether or not I want to swing for the fences on Glasner, and then I can go for Kluivert, who is maybe marginally my preferred pick out of the 2. But I'm pretty happy with Dango as well, and Arteta does give me that security of higher expected points at least. Obviously, he could still get 0. West Ham could win, but there's a lower likelihood of that happening than, of course, Fulham beating Palace, which is perfectly plausible, about a 46% chance of that happening. So it's between option 1 and 2. I'm pretty set on taking a hit to get rid of Rodgers, but it all comes down to whether or not I want to swing for the fences with the assistant manager on Glasner, go for table bonus yet again, or maybe consolidate my position with Arteta, something a bit more secure, and therefore I'd have to go with Altara. So moving on to my full team selection for game week 26, I've put in my 3 moves for the -4. I've actually picked option 2 for the time being, just as more of an example than anything else. Either way, I think I'm going to be taking a -4 for one of those 2 options I've just discussed. Cunha is likely to come in no matter which move I make. So Cunha away at Bournemouth comes straight into my starting 11. Unfortunately, that puts João Pedro away from home against Southampton on the bench. I was really hoping João Pedro would have won his place back by now, and he could be someone that I rely on to go into game week 26 against Southampton, but it doesn't look likely. I don't think there's any way I can start him right now, and as much as I'd love to move him on, because I don't really have much money in the bank, and the other forwards I want in place by game week 29 don't have great fixtures this week, I think he's a player that I'm just going to hold on my bench for the time being, and he can rot there for the next couple of game weeks. Cunha comes straight into the starting 11 for Gakpo. I'm pretty happy with that front 7. One of the 2 Bournemouth midfielders will probably be coming in for Rodgers. I've put in Cliver at the moment, and that gives me double Bournemouth at home to Wolves. Leicester away from home for Mbeumo with the vice-captaincy, and the captain's armband, of course, is on Mo Salah away at Man City. Also very happy to have Cole Palmer and Isak in my front 7 as well. Backline as well, pretty happy. It's a bit of a decision to be made between Trent away from home against Man City or Nottingham Forest at home for Lewis Hall. I think statistically Hall is the better bet, but if Chris Wood were to score against Newcastle and wipe out that Hall clean sheet for me, I'm not sure I could really take that. So I'm probably going to be benching Lewis Hall just so if Wood does wipe out that clean sheet and obviously do enough damage against me as it is, I don't at least have the double pain of also a clean sheet wipeout. Also, Trent is fantastic going forwards. The underlying data is brilliant, and I do have at least a bit of a gut feeling that he could get something against Man City as well. He got taken off early against Aston Villa in the midweek. He'll be fairly fresh going into Man City, and Connor Bradley also got injured in the last few minutes of the Liverpool game in midweek, so it looks like Trent is likely to get better minutes in the Man City game too. So Gabriel at home against West Ham, Robinson at home against Crystal Palace, and Pickford at home against Man United are all teams that I'm relatively happy with and players that I'm relatively happy with as well. So the big decision this week is whether or not I back the table bonus again for Glasner against Fulham away from home, or I go a bit more secure with Arteta and therefore would also go with Dango instead of Kluivert. Either way, it looks fairly similar in my starting 11. Obviously, the Bournemouth midfielder would shift depending on which assistant manager I go for. But right now, I think I'm very slightly more inclined to take the risk on the higher upside for Glasner, especially because Emery is expected around 4 or 5 points anyway against Chelsea. If I'm going to make that assistant manager switch, I might as well back someone with the higher upside in Glasner. Now, that's not to rule out Arteta by any means, because he could still get 10, 11, 12 points. And if I think that Chelsea are going to get a result against Villa, then Emery's probably not going to get much either. So making that move would make more sense. But right now, as it stands, I think I'm slightly more inclined to go with Kluivert and Glasner as the combination, because Kluivert has the penalties, is a slightly better longer term hold than at Dango Altara, I think, but it's very, very marginal. And then Glasner also gives me the higher potential upside. But also, of course, there is a universe in which he gets 0 points as well. So that is something that I do need to consider. Either way, I'm fairly happy, even with the -4 going into game week 26. I think I'm relatively confident in this 11, although getting a green arrow is going to be tougher given that I am taking the -4, but it helps me with my future planning and it does secure me another player, or in fact another 2 players for game week 29 and help get away from the need to free hit or take extra hits going into game week 29 in the future. So a bit of future planning going into it, but the -4 this week could be perhaps a little bit painful this week in isolation. Let me know in the comments below what your questions are going into the deadline, any dilemmas you've got with your starting 11, do let me know. And as always, if you've enjoyed today's video, leave a like, hit subscribe. That'd be greatly appreciated too. Good luck in Game Week 26. I'll see you on the other side as we start preparing for Game Week 27.